There are stories that feel almost too perfect, too poetic for the messy, unpredictable course of history. Tales of star-crossed lovers, of ancient dynasties and New World ambition colliding under the chandeliers of a world on the brink of chaos. We often look for these stories in the pages of fiction, in the grand tragedies of Shakespeare. But sometimes life itself writes the most poignant and heartbreaking script. This is one of those stories. It's a chapter often tucked away inside a larger, more famous saga of American political tragedy, the so-called Kennedy curse. But to leave it there is to do it a grave injustice. Because before the assassinations, the scandals, and the decades of public fascination, there was a love story. A brilliant, defiant, and achingly brief romance between the heir to one of England's greatest fortunes and the vivacious, unstoppable daughter of America's most ambitious family. This is the story of William Cavendish, the Marquis of Hartington, known to all as Billy, and Kathleen Kennedy, affectionately called Kick. It is the story of a golden wedding that, in the cruelest twist of fate, became a death curse. A story of love, faith, and the brutal cost of war. To understand their story, you have to understand their worlds. They were born into spheres that were, in the early 20th century, separated by more than just the Atlantic Ocean. They were separated by centuries of tradition, belief, and expectation. William John Robert Cavendish was, from the moment of his birth in 1917, a child of destiny. He was the eldest son and heir of the 10th Duke of Devonshire. This wasn't just any title, it was a cornerstone of the British aristocracy. The Devonshires were one of the great Whig families, shaping English politics and culture for over 400 years. Their power was written into the very landscape of the nation, most notably at Chatsworth House, a palace in all but name, a breathtaking treasure trove of art and history nestled in the Derbyshire countryside. To be the heir to Chatsworth was to be the custodian of a national identity. The house itself, with its 175 rooms, its priceless art collection featuring works by Rembrandt and Velázquez, and its magnificent gardens designed by Capability Brown, was a symbol of enduring British power. Billy's life was a path laid out in marble. He was educated, as generations of his forefathers were, at Eton College and then Trinity College, Cambridge. This was the classic production line for Britain's ruling class. He was groomed not merely to manage an estate, but to uphold a legacy. He was expected to be a leader, a soldier, and a statesman. The family motto, Cavendo Tutus, safe through caution, belied the centuries of bold political maneuvering that had secured their position. Yet the motto seemed to fit Billy's personality perfectly. By all accounts, he was a gentle, thoughtful, and unassuming young man, possessing a quiet integrity that seemed at odds with the immense privilege of his birth. He was handsome, dutiful, and destined to be one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the British Empire. He was the embodiment of the old world. And then in 1938, the new world arrived. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., a formidable and ferociously ambitious Irish-American tycoon, was appointed the United States ambassador to the court of St. James's. He brought with him his large, vibrant, and fiercely competitive family. They were American royalty, a dynasty built on Wall Street fortunes and bare-knuckle politics, not on ancient land grants. Joe Kennedy had instilled in his 9 children a ferocious will to win. Life was a constant competition, and second place was not an option. Their energy was boundless, their confidence absolute, and among them was Kathleen Kennedy, 20 years old, vivacious, and utterly irrepressible. In the formal, often stuffy world of London society, Kick was a revelation. She was witty, intelligent, and possessed an American directness that was both shocking and intoxicating to the British upper class. She didn't just navigate the debutante season, she conquered it. While English girls were taught to be demure, Kick was refreshingly candid. She once cheekily told a reporter, "In the States, I'm not the star. My sister Rosemary is the pretty one, Eunice the clever one, and my brother Jack the political one. Here, I'm the star." She danced with infectious energy. She debated politics with men twice her age, and she charmed everyone from footmen to future prime ministers. She quickly became the it girl of her generation, the most popular debutante of 1938. It was in this glittering, anxious pre-war atmosphere, the last great social season before the world changed forever, that these two worlds collided. Billie Hardington, the quiet, reserved heir, met Kick Kennedy, the dazzling American comet, at a dinner party. The attraction was immediate and profound. On the surface, they were an unlikely pair. He was the quintessential English gentleman. She was the spirited Irish-American rebel. Yet they found in each other a perfect complement. His calm steadiness grounded her boundless energy. Her radiant zest for life drew him out of his aristocratic reserve. His sister Deborah, later the Duchess of Devonshire herself, would recall, "We were all absolutely mad about Kick. She was the best company, full of life and wit. And we saw a happiness in Billie that we had never seen before." Their courtship unfolded against a backdrop of escalating dread. While they danced in ballrooms and picnicked on the grounds of magnificent estates, the drums of war were beating ever louder across Europe. Neville Chamberlain was pursuing a policy of appeasement with Hitler, a policy vocally supported by Kick's father, Ambassador Kennedy. This made the Kennedys increasingly controversial figures in Britain, but it did nothing to dim the romance blooming between Kick and Billie. They fell deeply in love, a private joy in a world consumed by public fear. But their love story was destined to face a battle far more personal than the one brewing on the continent. It was a conflict of faith, a seemingly insurmountable wall that threatened to keep them apart forever. The Cavendish family were pillars of the Church of England. Billie's father, the Duke, was not just a nominal Anglican. He was a high-ranking Freemason, a position deeply intertwined with the Protestant establishment of Great Britain. The Catholic Church officially condemned Freemasonry, viewing it as a secret, secular society hostile to the Church's authority. For his heir to marry a Roman Catholic was not just a social inconvenience. It was a challenge to the very fabric of their identity and heritage. It raised complex questions of allegiance, not just to a church, but to the crown itself, which Billie, as Duke, would one day be sworn to serve as a Lord Temporal. On the other side, the Kennedys were not merely Catholic. They were profoundly, devoutly so. The matriarch, Rose Kennedy, ruled her family with an iron will forged in unwavering faith. To her, the doctrines of the church were not guidelines. They were absolute law. Her piety was shaped by her Boston Irish heritage, where Catholicism was a badge of identity against the Protestant establishment that had long marginalized them. For her, faith was survival, a fortress. One of the church's most stringent rules at the time was the Netamir Decree, which stipulated that in any marriage between a Catholic and a non-Catholic, the non-Catholic partner must agree to raise all children in the Catholic faith. The wedding itself, to be considered valid in the eyes of the church, had to be performed by a Catholic priest. For Billie, this was an impossible demand. As the future Duke of Devonshire, he had a duty to his title, his family, and his country. The heir to Chatsworth could not promise that his own heirs, the future Dukes of Devonshire, would be raised in a faith outside the Church of England. It would have been a betrayal of centuries of tradition, an abdication of a responsibility woven into his very DNA. The conflict was agonizing. For Rose Kennedy, this was not a negotiation. It was a battle for her daughter's immortal soul. Her opposition was absolute, born from a lifetime of fierce, unbending piety. She saw Billy not as a fine young man who loved her daughter, but as a Protestant who represented a spiritual danger. She bombarded Kik with letters, filled with prayers, warnings, and emotional ultimatums. She wrote, "I'm so heartbroken. To think of you giving up your faith and the happiness of your life hereafter." To Rose, this was a matter of eternal salvation. She threatened to cut Kik off from the family completely, a threat that was devastating to a young woman who, despite her rebellious streak, adored her family. Kik was caught in an impossible vice. She was deeply torn, spending hours in prayer at London's Brompton Oratory, seeking guidance that never came. For nearly 5 years, this impasse held them captive. The war had erupted in 1939. Joe Kennedy, whose isolationist views made him deeply unpopular, was recalled to the United States, taking most of the family with him. But Kik found a way to return to England, a country she had grown to love, and where the man she loved was now preparing for war. She took a job at the Red Cross. Billy, true to his duty, had joined the Army, receiving a commission as an officer in the prestigious Coldstream Guards. The distance and danger only intensified their feelings. They wrote to each other constantly, their letters filled with longing and frustration, their love deepening even as the world fell apart. Kik refused to give up on Billy, just as he refused to give up on her. The turning point came in 1944. The war was raging, and the Allied invasion of Europe was imminent. The future was more uncertain than ever. The constant threat of death gave their love an urgent clarity. They decided they could wait no longer. They would defy their families and the dictates of their churches. They would choose each other. Kik made the heart-wrenching decision to marry Billy in a civil ceremony outside the Catholic Church. It was an act of profound rebellion, one that she knew would cause a permanent rift with her mother. In a final desperate attempt to find a compromise, she had met with the Archbishop of Westminster, who confirmed that no dispensation could be granted unless Billy agreed to raise their children as Catholics. He could not, and so Kik made her choice. She wrote a painful letter to her parents, trying to explain her decision, knowing it would be met with condemnation. Her father cabled back a cold, terse reply. Her mother responded with stony silence. On May 6, 1944, William Cavendish, Marquis of Hartington, and Kathleen Kennedy were married at the Chelsea Registry Office in London. It was a stark, simple affair. The bride wore a pale pink dress by the couturier Molyneux. The groom was in his military uniform. There were no grand celebrations, no crowds of well-wishers, a world away from the society wedding that would have been expected in peacetime. Of the entire sprawling Kennedy clan, only one member was present, her eldest brother, Joe Jr. He was a U.S. Navy pilot stationed in England, and he stood by his sister, giving his tacit approval to a union the rest of his family condemned. His presence was an act of sibling loyalty that Kik would cherish for the rest of her life. Billy's parents, the Duke and Duchess, though deeply concerned, were more accepting and attended the brief ceremony, a quiet show of support for their son's happiness. For Kik, the day was a mixture of supreme joy and profound sadness. She had her beloved Billy, but she had, in the eyes of her mother, imperiled her immortal soul and broken her family. Their married life was a stolen moment in time, a fragile bubble of happiness in a world at war. For just over 4 weeks, they were able to live as husband and wife, renting a small house at 4 Smith Square in Westminster. They tried to create a semblance of normalcy, hosting small dinners for friends when Billy could get away from his barracks. It was a life lived under the constant looming threat of the German V-1 flying bombs, the doodlebugs, whose terrifying sputtering engines would cut out before they fell, bringing random destruction to London. Yet friends who saw them during this time described them as blissfully happy, a golden couple who had overcome impossible odds to be together. But the war would not be kept at bay. Billy's leave was short. As an officer in an elite fighting unit, his duty was on the front line. Following the D-Day landings on June 6th, the fighting in Normandy and the push into France and the Low Countries was ferocious. In June, just 5 weeks after their wedding, Billy had to say goodbye to his new bride and return to his regiment. Kik was left to wait, praying for his safe return, working at the Red Cross by day and scanning the skies by night. The summer of 1944 brought a relentless cascade of tragedy. On August 12th, the terrible news reached the Kennedys. Joe Jr., the brother who had stood up for Kik at her wedding, had been killed. He had volunteered for an incredibly dangerous secret mission, Operation Anvil. He was to pilot a B-24 Liberator bomber packed with 21,000 pounds of explosives, aim it at a German V-3 supergun site in France, and bail out before impact. The plane was effectively a prototype cruise missile, but the explosives detonated prematurely over the English Channel. He and his co-pilot were obliterated. He was just 29. Kik was devastated by the loss of her favorite brother, her confidant and protector. And then less than a month later, fate delivered its second catastrophic blow. On September 9th, 1944, Captain Lord Hartington was with the 5th Battalion of the Coldstream Guards, taking part in the advance through Belgium. The goal was to clear German resistance in the wake of the main Allied push. His unit was tasked with capturing the town of Heppen. The fighting was intense, street by street, against determined pockets of SS troops. As he moved through an orchard to secure a position and encourage his men forward, Billy was hit by a single bullet from a German sniper. He was killed instantly. He was 26 years old. The official telegram arrived for Kik. The Marquess of Hartington, her husband of just 4 months, was dead. In that single sterile sentence, her world, which had been so full of love and hope, was completely and irrevocably shattered. The fairy tale had ended with the brutal finality of a sniper's bullet, and the golden wedding had left behind only a widow's weeds. Kik's grief was bottomless. She had defied her family, risked her faith, and found her one true love, only to have him snatched away by the random cruelty of war. She was now the Dowager Marchioness of Hartington, a 24-year-old widow, alone in a foreign country. In the aftermath of the tragedy, something remarkable happened. Billy's parents, the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, embraced Kik as their own. They had been wary of the marriage, but they had come to love their daughter-in-law's spirit and recognized the profound happiness she had brought their son. They saw her not as the Catholic girl who had married their heir, but as the woman Billy loved, now bearing the same unbearable grief as they were. The Duke, in a particularly moving gesture, treated her with the kindness and affection of a father. When he learned that Kik's own father had cabled her, insensitively suggesting she come home immediately, the Duke personally went to her apartment to comfort her. He wrote to Joe Kennedy Sr. himself a letter of incredible grace, praising Kik's courage and expressing his profound love for her as a daughter. This bond was solidified by Billy's final resting place. He was buried with his comrades in a military cemetery in Leopoldsburg, Belgium. His father made it clear that Kik would always have a place with them, with Billy, at Chatsworth. She spent much of her time there, wandering the vast halls and gardens that should have been her home, finding solace in the family that had become her own. Kik chose to remain in England, the country where she had found and lost her great love. It was a decision that further distanced her from her family in America, who could not understand why she wouldn't come home. But for Kik, England held the last tangible connection to Billy. She carved out a new life for herself in London, becoming a celebrated hostess. Her wit and vitality returned, but friends noted an undercurrent of deep sadness that never left her. The story, however, does not end there. The shadow of the so-called curse was long. 4 years after Billy's death in 1948, Kik Kennedy's own life came to a violent and tragic end. She had found love again with Peter Fitzwilliam, the 8th Earl Fitzwilliam. He was charming, incredibly wealthy, and a decorated war hero. But he was also a notorious womanizer, a heavy drinker, and, most problematically, married, though separated from his wife. Their affair was passionate and public, causing a scandal in society circles, and further horrifying her mother back in America. They planned to marry once his divorce was finalized. In May 1948, they decided to fly to the south of France for a holiday. Despite warnings of severe weather, Fitzwilliam insisted their small de Havilland Dove aircraft make the flight. While flying through a violent thunderstorm over the Ardèche region of France, the plane broke apart in midair. Everyone on board was killed. Kik was just 28 years old. The news of her death sent a final chilling shockwave through both families. Of the Kennedys, only her father, Joseph Sr., attended her funeral in England. Her mother, Rose, refused to attend the burial of a daughter who had not only married outside the church, but had died while traveling with a married man. It was a final tragic sign of the chasm that had opened between them. In a final act of love and reconciliation, Billy's father, the Duke of Devonshire, made a remarkable decision. He arranged for Kik to be buried not in her native America, nor in a Catholic cemetery, but in his family's private churchyard in the village of Edensor, on the edge of the Chatsworth estate. It was the closest he could bring her to his son, a permanent place in the land she had adopted, within the embrace of the family that had truly loved her. Today their graves lie an ocean apart, yet their stories are forever entwined. His is a simple military headstone in a cemetery in Belgium, one among thousands. Hers is a modest grave in a quiet English village. Her headstone, chosen by her Kennedy family, reads, Kathleen Cavendish, Marchioness of Hartington, born February 20th, 1920, died May 13th, 1948. And below it, a simple, poignant epitaph added by her friends, Joy she gave, joy she has found. So what is the legacy of this story? It is, of course, a profound and personal tragedy. A story of two young people full of life and promise, whose happiness was cut brutally short. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of war, which is not measured in battlefield statistics, but in shattered hearts and futures that never were. But it is also a story of immense courage, the courage to love across deep divides of faith and culture, the courage of a young woman who chose her own heart, even at the cost of alienating the family she cherished, and the quiet, dutiful courage of a young man who gave his life for his country just months after finding his greatest happiness. The story of Billy Hartington and Kik Kennedy is more than just a footnote in the Kennedy saga. It is a powerful, self-contained narrative about the enduring collision between love and duty, personal happiness and family expectation, and the fragility of life in the face of history's great impersonal forces. Their brief, shining time together and the twin tragedies that followed remind us that even in the lives of the most privileged, happiness can be a fleeting, precious, and ultimately fragile thing. It's a love story for the ages, written not in ink, but in tears. A golden promise silenced by the lonely, echoing report of a sniper's rifle. It leaves us with the unanswerable, haunting question of what might have been, a different future for a great English house, and perhaps a different fate for a legendary American family.